Good morning, everybody. We're back in 2021 with Real Talk, a slightly new format. On our first episode this year, which was informed by turbulent events around the world in the last year and on to this day, Brad and I are going to take some time and talk about what we label failed leadership on the world stage. And as Brad and I were discussing the subject, there were three characteristics or traits that were standing out when we were looking at recent world events. For example, the whole story around what happened in the United States around President Trump and the riots at the Capitol. But not only, there are many stories like that of failed leadership that are actually pretty similar, that we figured out that there are a number of traits that have been violated, leadership traits that have been violated, let me say it this way, that have played a major role in how the events have turned out. So let me ask Brad. Brad, why don't you disclose to our listeners what those three traits that we have selected are?
So just through discussing and exploring what happened and what played out, the first thing that came up was inclusivity and whether or not there's that balance of diverse views being listened to and then actioned. We followed that up then with trust and how important it is as a leader to imbue trust in your people, not to sort of spread distrust amongst people because it creates such a negative impact. And along with inclusivity and trust, what was also highlighted was the lack of an inspiring shared vision, with the real momentum being on the word shared. It's, if you look at, so you mentioned and referenced President Trump, actually he followed a lot of leadership behaviors. He challenged the process, he enabled others to act, he encouraged them, he role modeled the behaviors, he even inspired a vision, but not one that was shared. And when enabling others, he was disenabling others at the same time. When encouraging the heart of one, he was disrespecting the other. So this whole concept of inspiring a shared vision through to inclusive leadership seems to me to be the three layers that leadership fails on: inclusivity, trust, and a shared vision. So Frank, let's pick the first one, inclusivity. What do you understand it to be, and how do you see it not playing out in the example we're toying with today? Very carefully, I might add.
So inclusivity, in principle, as it's already in the word, it is about including various viewpoints, experiences, strengths, weaknesses of the in the corporate world, at least, of the team that you're working with. It is in leveraging the diversity that exists in these different personalities, the strengths and weaknesses, and so on. There's also a cultural component. So inclusivity, in my mind, as I said, and the art of it would be to somehow find a way to include the strengths and the weaknesses, but also the cultural specialties of your constituents into your plan, into your strategy, into your execution, so that in some shape or form, everybody feels equally valued. I'm sure there's a lot to add to that, Brad. Why don't you give it your spin?
Well, I want to pick up on your, this idea of valuing diverse contributions, because I think without that ability, you can't collaborate, you can't garner commitment from people. When I look on the leadership stage, one of the inclusive leadership traits is to have courage, to recognize when I do something wrong. When you look across global leaders, not so many of them are quick to say, I didn't do that right, I could have done that better. And whether we focus on the US outgoing president or we pick on other populist leaders, it seems as though that ability, that humility to step back from a point of view drives failed leadership, because ultimately that point becomes acknowledged by the whole population, or enough of them to vote you out if you're in the political landscape, or in an organization where a leader might find themselves losing their role because they're just not making those connections with the team that drive results and positive relationships. And so for me, inclusivity ultimately spins on positive relationships. What am I doing to create those positive relationships that encourage more collaboration for better? And we haven't seen that on the global stage particularly well.
No, we've not. You're absolutely right. And I think there's what makes failed leadership on the world stage in addition is that if you refuse to deploy any kind of cultural intelligence, if you refuse collaboration with people that may not be your main voters or may not be your day one allies or something like that, you actually create adversary. And that is something that I think I see happening a lot, that a lot of politicians these days, they thrive on division. Mm. It's true that the divided part, so the division that actually is with you, has a particular amount of momentum and strength and loud voices, but it always comes at the cost that the division that has been left out, that has been declared the enemy, will eventually also become stronger and fight you even harder. And I think this is exactly what we have been observing on the world stage. And that is, all of it is because inclusivity as a leadership trait was completely ignored.
It will drive failure. And I think it stands very closely maybe to our secondary point, which is to explore where trust plays a part in failed leadership.
All right, so the third element that we have singled out for our talk today, Brad, is trust. Trust as a must-have leadership trait also on the world stage. Where do we see that being necessary, and where have we seen it fail?
The trust is one of those ones for me that's a biggie, right? How do we create deeper levels of trust with the people around us? How do we make sure that we can create those levels of respect and credibility and reliability, but at the same time be intimate with people? And I think trust on the political landscape looks a little bit different because it's just one step detached, but it's still essentially the same kind of things. How do you create that credibility that you can actually do what you say you can do? And are you reliable? Do you actually do what you say you will do? So you had mentioned Trump before. We've talked about him. Very often he would tell the press, this is going to come out in 2 weeks' time, very exciting news. And then nothing would be announced. And when he was asked, it was like, yes, it's coming. So his credibility and his reliability get knocked on this regular basis because he says he's going to do something and then he doesn't do it. And we've seen in other leaders, both populist leaders and also slightly more democratic, if you make a promise, you've got to actually deliver on it. I think what it does from a trust point of view is, we give trust to our political leaders to run the country. And yet when we live in the world we're living in today, the pandemic world of lockdowns, people are becoming very uncomfortable with how much trust they gave to their politicians to run their life, to control their freedoms. And this is why we see so much discourse and disharmony across the globe. Because who are the leaders trying to satisfy? How do you build that level of trust? It seems to me, because I would never go into politics, Frank, I'll pass it back to you in a moment. But it seems to me that getting to become a leader, winning that election, getting that promotion, that's the easy bit. Actually leading and governing with a credible, reliable background, where you don't look like it's all about you, it's all about the people you lead, and where you create that safe space for people to want to talk about that intimacy level. That's really hard when you've got 60 million or 150 million or 300 million people to look after. It's hard enough with 8 in a team.
Yeah, that's
But
correct.
I pass it back over the net to you, right? Trust.
Yeah, you know what I was thinking, right? You're absolutely right. Of course, trust is earned through integrity, but of course, it takes time. It means you prove that you are doing something that you said you would do over time. Some things just take some time, you know. Even if I would such a crazy idea of saying I'm going to build a wall around Mexico or something like that, then this will take time. And of course, you can't judge a new leader after 7 days of has he done that yet or not, right? But this, you know, what for you, I'm sure you would agree. What is the number one thing that actually breaks trust instantly? And that is simply being caught lying. And if you then repeatedly been caught lying, there is no more foundation for trust. Lying is the worst thing.
It's hard to recover.
It's super hard to recover. And imagine on that kind of in that kind of job, in that kind of stage, actually, where people that trust you are not only your voters, they're also leaders, other leaders around the world, institutions around the world. So I think this is something that we see a lot these days, that leaders are caught lying. One famous person with yellow hair in particular, but I'm sure it's not the only one. And that actually, I think this created another problem we probably don't want to touch too much on, is that when people realize that they have been lied to, and probably even once, of course, they're not going to believe anything else that you're saying. So now we're also, the whole world almost is in a struggle of what is it that we should be believing? What is a credible source? Even previously credible sources are labeled as, you know, lying sources. So where is it? Everybody makes up their own truth. So this losing of trust or not focusing on trust has consequences that are long-term, that are catastrophic. And I think we find good evidence of that in these days.
And there's always an alternative truth. Whatever any one person thinks, someone else can think something else. And that's the freedom of speech that we have in democratic worlds. And I think when you look at inclusivity and you link it to trust, getting those two elements wrong, well, I think they're biggies. Compared to our third one, which is more tactical in its approach in inspiring a shared vision, if you get the trust wrong, you may only get one chance. If you continually fail in inclusivity, you won't be given another chance. I think just in the fact that you don't get second chances on those things, perhaps shows the level of their importance.
That's true. But we selected, that's the third point, we selected to talk about inspiring a shared vision in this talk as well. And although it doesn't have necessarily so obvious catastrophic results if you disregard it completely, it's so interesting because it's linked to the previous two in some ways. So as you pointed out earlier on the example of Trump, he certainly inspired a vision. He was gaining followers, and there's a lot of things that from a leadership perspective you would say have actually been efficient.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, as we talked about this, is if your vision is made for one part of the population only, then it's not a shared vision. If you don't give a flying, you know what?
Monkey.
About whether your vision is actually shared by a large enough part of the population, whether that is in a country or in a company, then I think it's set up for failure. Maybe you don't see it immediately, but you're inviting division, you're inviting adversity, excuse me.
And it's hard.
That's where it ends. over to you. Let's...
No, it's harder, Frank, to inspire a shared vision. Because by definition, it means you need to collaborate and connect with others, listen to their points of view, be inclusive, and find out how do we breathe life into it. I always recommend to leaders right through the business, from the very top right down. So the C-level suite, looking at what their shared vision is, and then they make sense of that vision to their directors, and the directors make sense of that vision to the team managers, and then the team leads, and then the individual contributors as you work through the layers of the business. And at each level, they should be coming up with their own shared vision and letting their team enable their team to bring that vision to life. And that requires us to have thought, what is our legacy going to be? What are we here to try and do? What is our purpose that we're trying to achieve every day, every week, every month, every quarter? And doing that from the point of view of inclusivity will harbor creativity. It harbors collaboration. But it takes time. And if you ask managers, have they got time to spend a couple of days thinking about their vision? They'll look at you and go, have you seen what's on my to-do list today?
Yeah, understandable. But even if you don't, even if you don't work on this on a daily basis, which you probably don't have to, but if you don't revisit it regularly, you need to build it in the beginning already with inclusivity in mind. And that's why, building a shared vision is impossible if you do not incorporate inclusivity in your thinking. Right?
It sounds intuitive, but it's amazing how often people miss it.
Right, and I think that's exactly what happened on the world stage. But to be honest, we're using the world stage here just to show that, failures to incorporate inclusivity, trust, and inspiring a shared vision in your leadership is not only a corporate thing. It's something that it's just so. But why does this work anyway this way? Because that's how people are wired.
Right.
We want to engage with something that resonates with us and that's good for us. We want inclusivity, right? I think most of us at least. And we definitely want to trust you. But
right.
You need to give us a reason, or at least not break it.
Right. At worst, not break it. At best, give us a reason. Yeah. You summarize it great for me. I think those are 3 quality lessons of the failed leader, and puts us all on notice of where our focus and attention should be if we want to have more positive results.
Yes. Well, I think it's good to wrap this up at this point. So failed leadership, actually there are many, many reasons how leaderships can fail in the end, when they start with good intentions and then mistakes are being made, which makes it even more important to make sure that as people are promoted into a leadership role or even promoted into a higher leadership role, that they begin and continue to hone their skills and their knowledge around how to do this, because there are a lot of little traps, and small ones and big ones.
And I think with gentle practice, when we share that inclusivity approach, everyone can adopt something that raises their level of inclusivity. And that would make a huge difference, especially leading during a pandemic and a winter European lockdown in play. It's a great topic, Frank. I'm sure we'll visit it again